Hi guys, Jarrod here, and I wanted to do a video about the PlayStation 3 launch. It was actually Steven's idea. He was like, hey, you know, the PS4 is coming out first, then the Xbox One. Why don't you do individual videos on your memories of the launches of the previous generation? So I thought that was actually a pretty cool idea, and so here we are. So, PlayStation 3 launched. When was that? 2006, I think it was? November 17th? Something like that? I picked up this bad boy. Oh boy, how are you going to see this? This is my launch box. My lunch box. Doo-doo-doo. It's the 60 gig model. Came with Talladega Nights. Yeah. This was classic. Yeah, okay. That's enough of that. So that's my launch model. Believe it or not, my launch model still works perfectly. Knock on wood. And so what do I remember? What happened back then? Well, believe it or not, the day before, so on November 16th, me and a friend, we actually drove down to Toronto. We live in Montreal here. And we drove down to Toronto for the PlayStation 4 launch party that Sony was holding. And it was out of control. I remember we were both crazy. We drove for I don't know how many hours straight because it takes, oh my goodness, hours and hours, like 5 hours or more to get to Toronto. And then we went to this party and they had like some kiosks set up and stuff like that. And we got to talk to the different reps and things like that. They had free drinks, free food, and we just had a really good time, right? But we had to keep our eye on the time because we had to get back because we had our launch systems to go pick up. And I actually pre-ordered my bad boy at Toys R Us here. And it was a Toys R Us in LaSalle, I think it was. And I went down and I remember I was like all scared because these things were going for thousands on eBay at the time. And I wanted my damn system. So I went in there and it was so funny. It was like I was smuggling drugs or something like that. The guys, they look at your receipt. They're like, hey, you already paid for it. Okay, we have your unit. They're like, meet us in the back. And I was like, okay. And they actually had a police officer hand this to me. And he's like, you know, be careful. You should, you know, get in your car and drive away right away. And that's because, if you don't remember, this particular model was $650 Canadian or $5.99 American at the time. And that was a lot of money. Like, that was insane. When you add tax to that, like 15% tax, that's like, woo, crazy. Plus, I picked up a couple of games. I wrote everything down here so I could actually remember. I picked up Resistance, Fall of Man, Genji, Days of the Blade, and Untold Legends, Dark Kingdom. You remember Genji from the whole like giant crab thing and the weak spot or whatever it was. That was an alright game. I got a lot of flack, but it was alright. It wasn't amazing, but it was cool. Untold Legends, if I remember right, was like a hack and slash game, I think. Whatever. But that too was alright. Resistance Fall of Man was probably the best launch title that I remember. I had a really good time with that one. But it's the time frame, okay? What I remember most about the PlayStation 3 launch is that party. The fact that a police officer handed me my system when I left. And then it was actually some of the negative stuff that I remember the most about the PlayStation 3 launch. Like, for example, coming home with a 6-axis controller. Now, I had already played with the PlayStation 3 at E3. I had already messed around with it at, like, the launch event and stuff like that. But actually coming home, you know, connecting it to your HD TV and things like that, and then grabbing the controller and going, like, wow, is this light? Because I don't know if you know this, but I've got one right here, my trusty DualShock. But the original 6-axis didn't have the rumble inside, right? So it was really light. It was extremely, extremely light. And it felt cheap. I was like, what the hell is this? And it was unfortunately some of the other things. Like, for example, when I wanted to go online, Resistance actually had its own dedicated friends list. A lot of people don't know that, but when the PlayStation 3 first hit, you could add friends and whatever, but it wasn't universal. Not every game used that dedicated friends list for their games. So it felt really, not archaic, but it felt less impressive than the Xbox 360, which I had been using for a year up to that point. And something else is, I got Gears of War, the original, on November 7th, 2006. Gears of War. Do you remember how nice that looked? Like, do you remember being blown away? Because I remember that. I remember being like, wow, this is incredible. Now, when I do my Xbox 360 memories video, you'll see that I was really disappointed when I got the Xbox 360. I was like, what is this crap? Like, the hell? And it's funny because I almost had the exact same feeling with the PlayStation 3. It just didn't feel like a complete package, right? I mean, you had a console whose controller didn't even have Rumble in it. And it's because that was a last-gen feature. Like, come on. I remember Phil Harrison talking about that. What a load of BS. We all knew it's because they were in legal proceedings with Immersion, the company that actually had the patent to the little Rumble technology. Anyways, so you had this light controller. You had a system who had a very sleek and sexy look, but you know, you didn't have a dedicated friends list. You couldn't easily message one person or another. You had to do like texting or whatever. There was no like communication basically like at all back then. And it just felt incomplete. And if there's one thing that Sony's done very well from launch all the way to today, is the fact that this bad boy isn't, like today, the one that I'm playing on, isn't this machine anymore. I mean, they changed this whole logo now. They changed so many of the different features that are available on the platform that it almost feels like an entirely different console. And you'll see that when I talk about the Xbox 360, I'm going to say pretty much the exact same thing because, well, it's true. Like, firmware updates have significantly changed basically the entire console space. The platforms we buy on day one are no longer the platforms we have at, say, like day, well, not day zero, but whatever, the last day of the platform. So that's very, very interesting. Now, back to Gears of War. I remember being so impressed with that, like floored when I got that. Steven and I had so many good memories with that. I'll save that for another video, but we had a really good time with that. So imagine, we've got the Unreal 3 engine, or Unreal Engine 3, or whatever it was called. Everyone was talking about Gears of War, like everybody. You have to remember that Sony at the time was really in hot water because they had lied like something awful about the PlayStation 3's real capabilities. They had shown us all kinds of flashy videos and all this FMV stuff, and you know, when we actually got to E3 the following year after the announcement and we tried this stuff, it didn't look anywhere near as good as what they had said the previous year. And not only that, but the Xbox 360 titles were really ramping up. I mean, these games were looking hot. And now suddenly, boom, here we go with the PS3 launch titles, and you're like, well, you know what? They don't look quite as good as the Xbox 360 ones. For example, like Resistance. As much as I really enjoy the game, you look at the finer details, and you're like, well, this doesn't look as put together, if you will, as Gears of War. What's up with that? And it's funny because I'm going to say the exact same thing when I talk about the Xbox 360, but they both had growing pains. They had a lot of growing pains. But the one thing that really hurt the PlayStation 3 for me was the price. It was the first console I ever plunked down over $1,000 for. When you include the extra controller I bought, you include the, they had a little adapter thing where you could take your PlayStation 2 memory card, stick it in, and you could actually transfer your save files from your memory card to the PlayStation 3. Now remember, this PlayStation 3 has full backwards compatibility, and it's funny, in hindsight now, while some of the launch was kind of sour to me because I didn't find it as impressive as I thought it would be, Now, I think the PlayStation 3 will probably go down in history as being my favorite PlayStation hardware because of the fact, this particular model, because of the fact that not only was it a PS3 itself, right? So it offered eventually some of my favorite games of the generation, like Uncharted, The Last of Us, and et cetera, et cetera. But it also had Blu-ray in it, which I know that's the reason why it cost so much money. And I remember when we first put on the first Blu-ray disc, everyone was like, wow, like the quality was unbelievable. But was it enough? Was it truly enough to justify that price? Back then, yes. Today, well, was it really necessary? That's debatable, right? But anyways, the other big thing for me was the fact that it was a PlayStation 1 and a PlayStation 2, and I thought that was absolutely brilliant. And I will do whatever it takes to keep that system in perfect working order, because otherwise I got to go back and buy a PlayStation 2. And my biggest pet peeve with the PlayStation 4 is the fact that it's basically done away with its entire legacy. The fact that they don't even allow you to play PlayStation 1 games, I think, is really sad. Because, I mean, embracing, you know, your heritage is special. And I understand, like, why it's being done. I'm not oblivious to this. But it's sad. I really, really wish you know, there was, like, a deluxe Omega $1,000 model or whatever that would allow you to fully play the entire library of PlayStation titles. Because I'm worried that my PS3 eventually will crap out on me, and then that sucks, you know? But anyways, that's not what we're here to talk about. So I just wanted to wrap up with some of my memories that I was super excited for the PlayStation 3, and then was very disappointed when it came out because, like I said, it felt half-baked. It didn't feel like that same experience that I was having with the PlayStation 2. Remember that around this time, we even got God of War 2. If I remember right, God of War 2 came out after the PlayStation 3 had come out. And I don't know, it's just all those great memories that I had with the PlayStation 2. It's sort of like there was like a blockade or something that just didn't pass through onto the PlayStation 3. And that's where, you know, we had this huge separation with third-party exclusives and all that sort of stuff. And I got to give it to Microsoft, man. They came from basically controlling none of the market to like dominating North America, and that's pretty amazing. But PlayStation 3 would grow to become one of my favorite platforms of the entire generation. And like I said, it's home to some of my favorite games, not only of the generation, but of all time. Those two I mentioned, the Uncharted series and The Last of Us in particular, are just like, wow. And I never imagined when I got my PlayStation 3 that we were going to have experiences like that. And so, yeah, that's pretty much all I really wanted to say about my PlayStation 3 launch memories. What about you? I'm sure you guys have memories waiting in lines or, you know, being super excited. How did you actually feel when you got home and you plugged it in? Were you just completely satisfied? Did you have an Xbox 360 and were you sort of like me because you had just come off Gears of War? Were you a little bit underwhelmed or what? I'd love to hear from you. I'd asked to do a video response, but Google doesn't allow that anymore. So by all means, leave a comment. I'm really curious to hear what your launch memories are of the PlayStation 3 and what you thought of the platform as a whole now that it's all winding down. So that's it. I will do one for the Xbox 360 probably in another week or so. Let's give this one some time to shine, and then we'll jump on the Xbox 360. So thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll be back soon with that video. Take care. Do